A lot of people on LinkedIn are building a brand that gets them likes, but not a single client. And after posting consistently for the last 3 years and building a real following in a pretty boring industry, insurance, I realized why that happens. It's not because they're not posting enough or they don't know what to say, although that can be hard. It's because they're building a brand that looks good but doesn't actually connect with the people who would hire them. So, in this video, I'll show you what actually makes people trust and follow you on LinkedIn, how to create content that attracts the right clients instead of just your peers, and the simple posting approach I've used consistently for the last 3 years to grow a real personal brand. But before we get into that, I want you to think about this for a second. If your ideal client was sitting right across the table from you right now, how would you talk to them? Would you sound really, really polished, or would you be trying to impress them? Or you probably wouldn't speak in generalities. You'd talk about real problems and real situations and things you've actually seen happen. But when people get on LinkedIn or social media, something changes and they start writing like they're trying to impress everyone instead of connecting with people. They get more generic and more polished and less real. And that's the exact moment that their personal brand starts to fall apart. Because building a personal brand on LinkedIn isn't about sounding impressive, it's about being understood by the right person. So here's where a lot of people get this wrong. They think being authentic on LinkedIn means being positive, professional, maybe a little polished. So what do they post? They post about promotions and networking events and big wins and events they went to, everything that's going right in their business. And listen, that's fine. You should do that. But if that's all you ever post, I think it starts to feel a little off because everyone knows that's not real life. That's not all of it. Nobody's business is just win after win after win after win. And when people feel that disconnect, they stop trusting what they're seeing. Not consciously, but in the back of their mind, they're thinking, yeah, but I don't think that's the full story. And the moment trust goes down, your personal brand goes with it. So, what I've found is that the content people actually connect with isn't the highlight reel. It's the stuff that didn't go perfectly. It's the mistake you made in a deal, the cold call that didn't go well, the deal that didn't close, the situation that didn't go how you expected, because that's the part that feels real. And it's also the part that people see themselves in, because not everyone has had massive success, but I guarantee everyone has failed. Everyone has had a deal or something not go their way. So when you talk about that openly, I think it does two things. One, it shows people you're telling the truth. And two, it makes them feel like, all right, this guy actually gets it. So I've had posts where I talk about things going wrong, audits that didn't go well and situations with subcontractors that caused problems and deals that fell through for me. And those are the ones that people responded to the most. And I don't think it was necessarily because they were the most dramatic, but they were honest. So to me, here's the simple way to think about it. If a post feels a little uncomfortable to share, it's probably the right type of thing to talk about because that usually means it's real. And when it's real, it builds trust. And trust is what builds a personal brand. Simple shift you can make in your content that will instantly make it better. And it's this. Stop talking about what you should do, what people should do, and start talking about I or what you have seen. Because what you have seen, done, and experienced is your story. Here's what a lot of LinkedIn content sounds like. You should do this, and companies need to focus on this, and business owners have to think about this. And the problem is that it all sounds so didactic and it all sounds the same. So it feels like advice you've heard from 100 times from 100 people that you may or may not trust. But the second you switch your post to everything changes. So I had a client that I ran into last week, and I ran into a situation where, or I made this mistake early on. Now it's not generic anymore. It's specific. Now it's real. It's yours. And that's something nobody else can replicate because at the end of the day, your personal brand is built on one thing and one thing only, your perspective. And your perspective comes from your experiences, not from what you've read and not from what you've heard, from what you've actually gone through. So, for example, I could sit here and say contractors need to track subcontractor insurance certs more carefully. Well, that's true, but it's also not very interesting. Now, compare that to this. I had a contractor who didn't track their certs correctly, and it blew up into a really bad audit situation that they couldn't get fixed. So it's the same idea, but one feels like advice and the other feels like reality. People pay attention to reality. So if you ever feel stuck on what to post, don't look outward, look inward. What have you seen this week? What conversations have you had? What problems came up? And start there because you know your story better than anybody else. And the more you lean into that, the more your content starts to stand out without you trying to make it stand out. Now, I want to visit another piece of advice we hear a lot in terms of posting, and let's talk about consistency. Everyone hears this, but a lot of people don't really understand it because they think consistency is just about posting more. Yeah, that's part of it. And I post about 6 times a week. I know that for a lot of people, when you hear that, you're gonna think, "Gosh, that's a lot. I don't know if I can do that." But let me promise you, once you get into a rhythm, it's really not all that bad. Big but the goal is not just to post more, the goal is to learn more. You do that by posting on other people's stuff and engaging in other people's content, but also based on the feedback that you get, because every time you post, you're getting feedback, and what people respond to and you're learning what they ignore and what actually resonates. And if you're only posting once in a while, that feedback loop is really slow. But when you're posting consistently, you start to see patterns. You'll notice certain topics hit and certain stories land. Certain ways of saying things connect better than others. And over time, you can lean into that. And that's how your content improves. Not by sitting there trying to think of the perfect post, but by putting things out, seeing what happens and adjusting. That's also how you find your voice. Because nobody starts out sounding natural on LinkedIn. I mean, for me, I was reposting insurance journal articles and not saying much else when I first started. Everyone's got to start somewhere. So everyone's a little stiff and everyone's a little unsure, but in trying to sound right. But the more you post, the more that's going to go away. You stop overthinking and you start sounding like yourself. And see, that's when it really starts to click. So if you're waiting until you feel ready or until you feel like your content is perfect, you're going to be waiting a long time because clarity in your voice doesn't come before consistency, it comes afterwards. So let me tell you another place where a lot of people miss the mark. And I know I did early on. I tried to make my content apply to everyone. And when I did that, it didn't connect with anyone because the broader you make your message, the more generic your message becomes. And generic doesn't stick. So here's a simple shift that changes everything. When you sit down to write a post, picture one specific person, not an audience, but one person. What do they do? How big is their business? What problems are they dealing with right now? And so for me, a lot of the time I'm thinking about a business owner, either a human service business or a contractor with 10 to 50 employees. And they've got jobs going on, employees calling out sick, and they've got equipment to take care of, and they've got independent contractors. And half the time their insurance is a mess. And they don't know what's covered and they're worried about audits, but they're still just too busy trying to keep everything organized and running their business. So instead of writing a post for business owners, I'm talking directly to those personas. I'm thinking about what I would say if I were sitting across the table from them and what would actually help them. What would make them stop and say, yeah, that's exactly what I'm dealing with. And here's what happens when you do that as a writer. One person reads it and feels like it was written just for them. And even though you only had one person in mind, there are a lot of people that fit that persona and are in the same exact situation. So it ends up resonating with a lot more people, not less. So that's the paradox. The more specific you get, the more your content actually spreads. So the next time you're about to post, don't ask yourself, how do I make this apply to everyone? Ask, who am I talking to right now? Now, once you understand who you're talking to, the next question is, what do you actually say? Because a lot of people get stuck here. They'll say, I don't know what to post. I know I got stuck there. But it's not usually because you don't have anything to say, it's because you don't have a framework. I know I didn't. So here's a simple one that I use and it works really well. It comes from Marcus Sheridan and it's called the Big Five. It's based on this idea. What are the questions your customers are asking before they buy? Because if you answer those questions in your content, you don't have to convince people to work with you. They convince themselves to work with you. So here are the big five. It's how much does it cost? What are their problems? Compare one thing to another. What's the best version and how do you buy it? So now think about your business and what you are selling. How much does it cost? What can go wrong with your product? How do you compare different options with what you're offering? What's the best choice for a certain situation? How does someone actually go through the process of buying it? Those are the things that people really care about. And don't be surface level, don't be vague. Real questions that impact decisions. That's what you should be answering. And when you start answering those questions consistently, two things will happen. One, you'll build trust because you're addressing things people are already thinking about. And two, you're going to attract people who are actually in the market because those questions only matter if someone is considering a decision. So instead of trying to come up with something clever to post, just ask yourself, what questions am I answering every day in my business? Start there because that's the content your future clients are already looking for. Now, I want to tell you about one of the biggest traps on LinkedIn. It's really easy to fall into. I know I get there sometimes because the people who engage with your content the most are usually the people in your industry. They understand what you're talking about. They understand your terminology. They've dealt with the situation. So when you post something, a lot of times they're the ones liking it. They're commenting on it, telling you it's great, and that feels good. But here's the problem. They're not your customers and they're not going to buy anything from you. So you end up getting a lot of validation, but not a lot of business. And if you're not careful, you start creating content for them. You start talking about the things they care about, industry conversations, behind the scenes details, things that make sense to you, but not to your client and not things that they care about. And that's when your content can start to drift because your customers they don't really care about you, they care about themselves. And they care about whether their business is protected, and they care about their problems, and they care about whether they're overpaying. They care about whether something's going to go wrong. So if your content doesn't connect to them, it's not going to land. Even if it gets engagement, and it's getting engagement from the wrong people. So a simple way to check yourself is this. Before you post, ask yourself, would my ideal client actually care about this? And if the answer is no, it's probably not worth posting because attention from the wrong audience doesn't lead to the outcome you're looking for. Okay, let me talk to you about the difference between content that's interesting and content that actually drives business because a lot of people will talk about ideas. They'll give advice, they'll share opinions, but they don't show any proof. And without proof, it's hard for people to fully believe it. So, tell stories, give real examples, real situations, and real outcomes, things that show, not just tell what you're talking about. So, for example, instead of saying you can save money by structuring your insurance program, say it this way. Tell a story. Say, hey, I worked with a contractor who was paying X. We restructured their program and they ended up saving Y while improving their coverage. Now it's concrete and it's believable, and somebody reading it can say, okay, I can see how this actually happens. And it doesn't always have to be a big win. Sometimes it can be a mistake or a claim or an audit that didn't go well. Anything that gives people a clear picture of what this looks like in real life. Because when buyers are trying to make a decision, they're not just looking for ideas, they're looking for evidence. They want to understand what's possible and what can go wrong and what it can actually look like to work through these situations. So, the more you can bring real examples into your content, the easier it is for people to trust you and the easier it is for them to see themselves working with you. So, if your content ever feels a little flat, ask yourself, where's the proof? Because usually that's what's missing. Okay, so you can spend a lot of time thinking about your posts, but that's not really where the decision's going to happen. Your posts get attention. Your profile is what converts that attention. So think about what you do. When you see a good post, what do you do? You click on the person's profile and you make a decision within a few seconds about who is this person and what do they do and can they actually help me? And if it's not immediately clear, you leave. So it doesn't matter how good the post was, your profile has some heavy lifting to do. It needs to clearly communicate who you help and what problems you solve and what proof you have, and not in a complicated way, in a way that someone can understand in about 5 seconds. That means your headline matters, your about section matters, your featured section matters, and all of it needs to reinforce the same message. Because if your content is attracting the right people, but your profile is confusing them, you're losing opportunities you don't even realize you had. So before you spend all your time trying to write better posts, make sure that when someone lands on your profile, they will instantly know they're in the right place. I want to dig into something that everybody's talking about: AI. AI can be incredibly helpful for your content, but it can also ruin your content if you're not careful. Because the easiest thing to do right now is open up your AI tool of choice and say, write me a LinkedIn post about this. Because it will, and it will come fast. But the problem is, it's going to sound extremely generic and it's not going to sound like you. It's going to sound polished and safe, and it's going to sound very, very average. And that's exactly what we're trying to avoid here. So, here's a rule that I follow. I use AI to edit my thoughts, but I don't use it to create my thoughts. So you have to start with your idea and your story and your experience and your own perspective. Then, if you want, you can use AI to clean it up. One of my favorite ways to do this is I will dictate into a Word document, copy that into ChatGPT and ask it to write a LinkedIn post in my voice. And what it's going to do is it's going to tighten the wording and improve the flow and make it easier to read. But the core of it comes from me. And that's the part that's going to make your content different. And that's the part that people actually connect with. If you skip that step, you might be posting more, but you're not building a real personal brand. So I like to think of AI as an editor, as somebody that's sitting next to me and helping me clean up my thoughts. But it is not my writer. It is not my ghost writer. It should make your voice clearer, but it should not replace it. Now, all this stuff is good, but if you give up too quickly, none of it matters. And this is where a lot of people fall off. It's not because they don't know what to do, it's because they don't give it enough time to work. They might post a couple times, maybe for a couple weeks, maybe a couple months, and when nothing happens, they stop. But this game doesn't work that way, because what you're building here isn't just content, you're building trust, and that takes time. Every post you put out, every story you share, every example you give, it all stacks. And most of the time, you don't even see it happening. Someone might read your post for weeks or months without ever liking or commenting or letting you know. But then one day they reach out and it feels like it came out of nowhere, but it didn't. They've been following you for a long time. They're called lurkers, but it was everything you posted leading up to that moment that encouraged them to reach out. And so there's another side to this too. If you're not putting content out there, someone else is. And those other people are educating your customers, shaping how they think. They're influencing the decisions they're going to make. So when that person is ready to buy, they already trust someone else, and that's the risk of not showing up. So the goal here isn't to go viral and it's not to chase likes. It's to consistently show up and become the person your audience trusts over time, because once that happens, everything else gets a lot easier. So once you start to actually see what resonates and you start getting feedback from your posts, this is a lot on how to make LinkedIn work for you, but it is only one way to get leads. And so if you're looking for a better picture on all the ways to generate leads, I recorded a video about the 3 engines that can make it go. And if you click right here, I dig into it, and I'll see you there.